Welcome to another episode of The Brand Called You, a podcast and podcast show that brings you leadership lessons, knowledge, experience, and wisdom from thousands of successful individuals from around the world. I'm your host, Ashutosh Garg, and today I'm delighted to welcome a very successful and accomplished entrepreneur from Los Angeles, USA, Mr. Mark Rampolla. Mark, welcome to the show.
Thank you. Very nice to be here. Thank you
Thank
for
you.
inviting me.
Mark is the Chief Executive Officer and founder of ZICO Coconut Water, a brand that helped create the now $8 billion global coconut water category. He transitioned into investing, co-founding Power Plant Partners, where he played a key role in the plant-based food movement, including the success of Beyond Meat. In 2020, Mark made a bold move by repurchasing ZICO from Coca-Cola with a group of investors, including Jesse Itzler and tennis star Naomi Osaka.
Mhm.
Mark, with this incredible journey that you've had, my first question is, what experiences or influences in your early life shaped your journey?
Wow, fascinating question. Yeah, I would have to say what's interesting for my background, I have no entrepreneurs in my family,
Mhm,
immediate family. My grandfather had some failed experiences well before I was born.
mhm,
And in fact, no business people. And really, I didn't grow up around business people or entrepreneurs.
mhm,
And yet I at a relatively young age, I had a spirit of adventure. I like to go hike in the woods, build things, create things. And I just didn't know that that was called entrepreneurship. And it really
mhm.
took me until after graduate school,
Okay.
college, even through business school, I still thought entrepreneurship was odd, didn't
Mm,
make sense to me.
mm,
And at some point, I started to, meet enough people, kind of understand, and thought that, hey, this is a part of life, a type of career in life that I want to have.
mhm. Amazing, amazing. And what an amazing life. So, what was the inspiration to discover coconut water to create Zico? And how did you identify the market opportunity?
Yeah, so I was living in Latin America at the time. I had first moved abroad with a U.S. volunteer program called the Peace Corps, and I was a Peace Corps volunteer in Central America. And then I went back after business school and had a corporate job. I was living and working in El Salvador, of all
Mhm,
places, the country.
mm,
And the business I ran was selling packaging to the food and beverage industry.
mhm,
So I was sort of following beverage trends and trying to stay on top of that for my customers, but even just as a supplier. But as I began to think about becoming an entrepreneur, I decided I wanted to do something that was consistent with my values. I care very much about health and wellness. I care about sustainability. I care about social impact. And so, I began to think about what products might I be able to export from Latin America, from the tropics to the US or Europe. And at the time, I was drinking like, millions of, billion plus people around the world coconut water every day.
mhm,
I would have it at the beach. I'd have it, when I was feeling dehydrated. It was a good mixer. It was a good hangover cure back when I used to drink. I don't
mm,
anymore. But I began to understand its real replenishing properties. But when it really started to click for me was when I began to research and understand that, coconuts grow in 85 countries across the world, obviously India being a massive one.
yeah.
But generally speaking, the main infrastructure in business is around the meat and oil, and the water was literally thrown away. I
Mhm.
remember visiting a facility in the Philippines that cracked 1 million coconuts a day and threw the water away. They
Wow.
only wanted the meat and oil. So the big aha moment for me was, wait a second, if we could build a supply chain that can, be based on this amazing infrastructure that already exists, no need to plant any additional trees or affect any additional land. If we can position it correctly, American consumers don't know, European consumers don't know about coconut water. How
Mm,
do we position it as a better for you, healthy brand that frankly is also cool? And so that gave birth to what
wow.
ultimately became Zico.
Amazing. What an amazing story. Thank you. And what were some of the strategies that made Zico one of the fastest growing beverages?
Yeah. Look, it's when I look back, I think one of the things that was very helpful. First of all, what's interesting is I can only imagine among, in New Delhi and in India, but I certainly had this comment from friends of mine across Latin America. How many people didn't have this idea when they, despite the fact of, living with it every day.
Yeah.
Can you still see me? My computer went a little
No, I can see you.
haywire.
Yeah.
Okay, great. So the some of the challenges were, first of all, deciding where and how to launch in the US.
Hmm.
And so, it's a big market. First of all, even deciding to launch in the US or not. So I was living and working in Latin America. That was a possibility. I decided the US was the place to launch. A lot of brands had previously gone after the Latino or Indian or Asian market. And I decided I wanted to make this go after the mainstream market.
Hmm.
And so that series of sort of decisions led me to choosing to launch in New York. One of the other criteria
Hmm.
was when I looked back over every beverage company I could look at, Gatorade, Red Bull, Monster, et cetera. But even in the tech world, when you look at
Hmm.
Facebook, they
Hmm.
launched in Harvard, then the Ivy Leagues,
Hmm.
then colleges, and then expanded. So really, as I looked across all sorts of business cases, I realized the general rule of thumb was inch wide, mile deep. And so I decided we're going to launch in New York. If
Hmm.
we can't find an audience and a number of audiences to make it work in New York, we're never going to figure it out. But
Hmm.
if we can figure out how to make it click in one market,
Hmm.
then there's the potential for it to scale. So that was sort of the key strategy was pick a market, pick a hypothesis on consumers, and then we spent the first year testing and learning. Where does
Hmm.
it work? Where does it not work? We tried, soccer stadiums or soccer fields and basketball courts and gym and dance studios. And the surprising place where it really clicked was yoga studios.
Wow.
At the time, hot yoga was becoming
Hmm.
popular
Hmm.
in the US, particularly in New York. 90 minutes, 120 degrees Fahrenheit, sweaty yoga. And that audience is one that cares about hydration. They
Hmm.
understand the importance of electrolytes, but Gatorade to them has nothing to do with their lifestyle, right?
Correct. Correct.
So that wound up being our, sort of first passionate consumer base. And
Hmm.
really, we at some point we had a strategy that was follow the yogis. We started to go to different markets around the country,
Hmm.
launching in these hot yoga studios.
Amazing. Amazing. And yet, despite such a successful brand, what led you to sell ZICO to Coca-Cola in 2013? And what were
Yeah,
some of the lessons from selling ZICO?
yeah. Well, when I look back, for better or worse, my goal was to sell to Coca-Cola. I started out with four goals, which was, build a brand that would stand for healthy, natural, active living and encourage that among, especially kids that were, moving towards more sugary drinks. Build a global industry that brought value into the countries that grow it versus coffee that's just, exported as the beans and all the values added elsewhere.
Mm.
Build a team and organization that was an incredible place to work and sell to Coca-Cola Company.
Mm.
And my reason for that was I didn't want to own the business forever. I didn't want to pass it down to my kids. I have a little bit of typically I know myself well enough to know about 10 years is about as long as I think I could do anything.
Mhm. Mhm.
And so I figured it might take that long. And part of the big vision, I love the audacity of this, but it was a little naive, was what if I could convince the Coca-Cola company they can make billions selling something healthy,
Mm.
right? They've got one of the best distribution systems in the world. They can get
Correct.
products anywhere. I would go to the most remote villages in Latin America and find Coca-Cola.
Yeah.
What if it was something healthy? So there was a naivete to that, of course, but that was the dream, and I
Mm.
stuck with that dream, and I achieved that, and I think and we'll talk about the story of the brand coming back.
Mm. Wow. Wow. And then, I love the way you said 10 years is, some kind of a mental time horizon that you have. But 7 years later, you decided to buy it back.
Correct.
And what prompted you to buy it back?
Oh boy. Well, by that time I had, like as you had mentioned, I had started and I became an active angel investor first, and I started an firm called Power Plant to invest in plant-based food and beverages. We morphed into what's called we could now call ground force capital to do more growth style investing. But along that journey, we got word that the Coca-Cola company post-COVID was focusing on their core products and was selling down or selling off or shutting down 200 brands globally.
Mhm.
ZICO was among them. By this time, my personal situation was I felt like I've got two beautiful daughters and this one ruly son called ZICO. We
Mm,
got him off to the Harvard of the beverage industry into Coca-Cola. I was done, right? I had moved on. But by this point, I was looking at this with my business partner as a pure economic opportunity. Now, wait a
mm,
second. The
mm,
category had grown to be, a billion in the US, 8 to 10 billion globally. There was one major competitor. ZICO at one point had 25% market share. Coke had, under Coke's control, had actually fallen to about 10. By the time we took it over from them, it hit zero. And so the premise was, wait a second, there's a $1 billion category. It's today the fastest growing beverage category in the US, faster
mhm,
than energy, coffee, sodas, sports drinks, anything. So in most typical, as in most industries, I'm sure you're aware, and certainly
mm,
in beverage, it's rare you have one competitor that has a 50% market share, right?
mm,
Usually you have a couple competitors, and the second closest is probably about 15%. So
mm,
we saw an opportunity to build Zico back to get to that market share position, 250 million of opportunity in the US alone. Let's
mm,
go after it. So we
mm.
we we bought the brand back.
Amazing. And then, and I want to talk to you about plant-based, investments and Beyond Meat a little later. But I still want to stay with Zico because this is such an amazing story. What prompted you to bring such high-profile investors to repurchase Zico, like Jesse Itzler and Naomi Osaka?
Sure. One of the things I realized, which was humbling, there was a time when Zico in the US was a very known brand. The
Mm,
people that knew coconut water knew Zico. Coke at some point had spent $40 million on marketing the brand. And so there was some general awareness, household awareness, and brand
mm,
familiarity. But one of the things I began to realize is, consumers across the world, but particularly American consumers, have a very short attention span, right?
mm,
So what they knew 2015, 2017, by the time we bought the brand, even from the time we bought the brand at the end of 2020 until we took it over and began to sell in late 2021, brand awareness had plummeted.
mhm,
Consumers move on, retailers move on. And so what I realized that was likely to happen. And I know, look, it's a noisy world. We need everything we can in our favor to help people become aware and excited about the brand.
mm,
So, at the same time, I'm an absolute believer that those need to be natural, organic, legitimate, connections. Jesse Itzler is a very good friend of mine. He's got a fanatical following of runners in social media. He was an investor first time around.
mm.
Naomi, I didn't know personally, but I knew a number of her team. We had many friends in common, and I found out she was a fan of the brand. So
Okay.
I got it to her, and talked through. She's at a point in her life where she's very concerned about health and wellness. She was coming back, her sort of own comeback story.
Mm.
And we have a number of other celebrities and athletes and influencers that are investors as well.
Amazing. Amazing. And my last question on Zico, what is your vision for Zico this time around? And how is it different from the first time?
Yeah, great question. Great question. The vision now is really the same two original points remain.
Hmm.
See Zico become a brand that stands for healthy, natural, active living and encourages that, not
Hmm.
only across the country, but across the world. Help coconut water achieve its full potential, right? I
Mhm.
still think this can be a $10 billion category in the US
Yep.
alone, let alone globally. So I want to see the category really grow and Zico play a role in that. And look, part of this very much for me is I love going. I haven't been to India, unfortunately. I will very soon.
Hmm.
But one of the things I've loved seeing across the developing world is the investment that has happened to support coconut water. There's been billions invested. I want to
Hmm.
see that continue to happen. The difference now is we are building the business to last. Because one of the things I'll own is once Coke became interested, and there was sort of the likely path for them to acquire the brand. My effort, my whole team's effort became let's make it work in their system. Nothing right or wrong about that. That was the right thing to do at
Yeah.
the right time. But we didn't build a business to last. The brand was built to last, but not the business.
Hmm.
Now we're building the business to last. And so, what does that mean? I'm not sure, right? I like to sort of center an attention and hold it lightly, right? So we absolutely have investors now. This is through one of our investment funds. We have outside investors. The company's actually raising more money right now. So we need to deliver return to those investors.
Yeah.
We will do that. We have an unbelievable team that wants to grow as far as they possibly can. So I see this at a point in a couple of years where we have some tough decisions to make, right? Do we want to keep building? I expect somebody to come by and want to acquire it, or do we support this team? Let them go run it. Do we take it public? Do we combine it with other beverages? But I'm convinced, coconut water's got a big future and ZICO's got a role to play in it globally.
Absolutely. I completely endorse what you're saying on coconut water because I know in India, when the summer is, the heat can be terrible. Uh,
Oh,
Everybody on my golf course carries 2 bottles of coconut water in their golf bags.
interesting.
So you're
Interesting.
absolutely right. But Mark, moving on, uh, you founded Zico, and then you picked another incredible winner, which is Beyond Meat.
Yeah.
What is it that is, that you look at that you get such amazing products that become huge brands?
Look, as you know, right, it's easy to talk about all the positive ones.
Yeah.
The reality is that I also made a lot of really bad investments before
I'm
finding Beyond
I'm
Meat.
sure. Yes.
And so some of it is learning, some of it is connection, some of it is trend spotting in a way. So what was helpful for me, I remember when I had my own plant-based journey of sort of started with for me it started with environmental concerns mainly,
Mhm.
just sort of awareness that of the food industry completely, but then particularly animal products, the
Mhm.
impact they had on the climate. I also began to become a little bit more aware and concerned about the health impact, diet had.
Mhm.
And so I became interested in sort of, plant-based and diet myself. But I also realized living in LA, had a very young, health conscious team in at ZICO. They were beginning to eat more and more plant-based, if not all the time, at least
Mhm.
as part of their routine, right? So I started to realize, okay, this isn't just a fad. There might be something here.
Mhm.
And so one of the investments I made was a plant-based restaurant chain called Veggie Grill. And through that process, got more interested in sort of the food service side of the business. But on the consumer product side of the business, I realized so many of the brands I was seeing were plant-based in
Mhm.
beverage and snacks and food. Living in LA, I had the good fortune of meeting Ethan Brown and knowing, having a lot, the founder of Beyond Meat, having a lot of friends in contact, investors, people I knew that had gone to work there, that were advisors, that were investors. So it just made sense for us to invest as a firm. So it was
Mhm.
one of the first investments we made as power plant partners. And that turned out to be a really great winner. Now
Mhm.
that the company's had its challenges, the whole plant-based, sort of wave has had its challenges, but that's one of the reasons we shifted the ground forces. We still invest in plant-based, but that's not all we do. So
Mhm.
we're thinking beyond that.
Very interesting. Mark, I have time for 3 more questions. And now these 3 questions are for you personally, away from your brands. Looking back on your career, what are you most proud of? And what, if anything, would you have done differently?
I'll answer the second one first, and it's nothing.
Hmm.
Every once in a while, it may come up to me when I'm in a moment. Oh, if I'd only done this, But then I remember I love my life
Mm,
and I love where I am today. Had I made one decision differently in the past, I wouldn't be where I am now. So I don't
mm,
spend any time really thinking about what I could have done differently.
mm,
And, pride's a hard one for me. And part of that is, maybe a Catholic upbringing. But what I feel I like to use the word appreciative and
mhm,
thankful. So what I'm really thankful of is that I have not let fear holding me back from taking some risks,
mm,
having some adventures, doing what I want. Because I did have fear, I did have concerns. Who doesn't,
yeah,
right? Maybe some people don't. I don't know them. It's not
mhm,
me. But I'm just so glad that I took the risk, for example,
mm,
joining the Peace Corps, moving to Latin America. I took the risk of taking this job back in Latin America. I took the risk to start ZICO. And I also am appreciative that I had the support around me, family and friends that, supported that along the way. And that's what allows me to continue to learn and grow
mm,
is I'm willing to put myself in really difficult situations, very uncomfortable situations,
mm.
and do my best to figure it out.
Amazing. My time for two more questions. There are a lot of aspiring entrepreneurs I know in India and the US, which is the market my podcast normally is heard in, who are very keen on the food and the consumer goods industry.
Yeah.
What advice would you give to aspiring entrepreneurs to make an impact in consumer goods?
Yeah. What I would say is, look, if you have a really deep passion and you've seen a problem or an opportunity
Mm,
that you are ready to commit the
mm,
next decade of your life to,
mm,
regardless of whether you make any money,
mm,
right?
mm,
Along the way or at the end,
mm,
and you still want to go after it,
mm.
great, you got a
Okay.
shot.
Mm,
If you're going into this to get rich in a couple of years,
mm.
something else, you
Very
know.
well said.
And what I find is at least the people that, after investing in dozens, scores of entrepreneurs, I speak to hundreds a year. When I see someone's face that's like, what are you telling me? I thought this was a get quick rich.
Mm.
I'm out, right? It's the ones that say, oh yeah, look, I'm going to do this anyway. I'm passionate about this. I think I'm going to be an exception, but it doesn't matter. I'm
Yeah,
going for it.
yeah,
That's the people that have a shot, at least.
absolutely. Very well said. Thank you. And my last question, Mark, what are your future goals, both personally and professionally? And what legacy do you hope to leave behind?
Wow, great question. So in addition to, Zico, which I want to see live, forever and
Yeah.
scale,
Mm,
as a firm at Ground Force, what I'm excited about is building a multi-billion-dollar asset management firm
mhm,
that has one of the best cultures in finance.
mm,
That we have a culture that is about making a positive impact
mm,
through the investments we make, through the way we work with each other, for the human connections we have, and deliver exceptional returns. And so that's what I'm aiming for. And hopefully it's a legacy that, you know, there's, people that may not even be, in college yet, come to work for Ground Force and say, wow, this is an unbelievable, very unique place in finance where I can become my best self and make a sort of a platform to make their own positive impact on the
mm.
world.
Amazing. You are the first person in thousands of people I've spoken to who has actually said, I want to build a strong culture and then brought profits later. But on that
Mhm.
note, Mark, I just want to say thank you so much for speaking to me about your own incredible journey. Thank you for speaking to me about ZICO, how you found the opportunity, how you built it with the objective of selling to Coca-Cola, and how you bought it back and is now looking at a 10, 12, 15, $20 billion market, not just in the US, but around the world. I
Yeah.
didn't get a chance to go into much detail about Beyond Meat. Hopefully, maybe a few months from now, I'll reach out to you because that's another very fascinating product that you seem to have been used to be picked up very, very early because it's a major force now in the plant-based foods. Thank you also for sharing with us some of your own journey, some of your own plans, and some of your own thoughts on what kind of a legacy you leave behind.
Thank you. I
Thank you
appreciate
again, and
that.
good luck to you.
Wonderful questions.
Thank you for listening to the Brand Called You videocast and podcast, a platform that brings you knowledge, experience, and wisdom of hundreds of successful individuals from around the world. Do visit our website www.tbcy.in to watch and listen to the stories of many more individuals. You can also follow us on YouTube, Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. Just search for the Brand Called You.